This is the National Desk, America's News Now.
Pro-Palestinian protests continue on college campuses across the nation, where students are calling on universities to divest and what that means. The legal troubles are far from over. What experts say needs to happen for disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein to be tried again. And demanding change. The FDA is now facing pressure to reduce the amount of toxic heavy metals in baby food, the deadline the administration now has to make it happen. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this Weekend Edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the four big stories we've been following this week. The state of Arizona has now repealed its near-total abortion ban. The procedure is now banned in the state at 15 weeks. And President Biden speaks with his Mexican counterpart to talk enforcement at the border. On Capitol Hill, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is not backing down from her efforts to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson. Plus, a Baltimore criminal case on the misuse of artificial intelligence sheds light on the need for updated laws. Those stories in just a few minutes. But first, it's become a common chant at colleges and universities across the nation. Protesters calling on their institutions to divest from Israel. But what exactly is divestment? The National Desk, Jeff Harris, explains.
Think of divestment as the opposite of investment. When protesters chant divest from Israel, they're asking that their schools sell off any investments they have with companies tied to Israel. But each school has different demands, and not all are asking for the same thing.
Students feel like, as this is their institution, they should have some say.
Divest from Israel. That's been a common message spreading on college campuses across the nation.
We will accomplish divestment. We are going to stay here until that.
But students at Columbia and students at universities like Yale are asking for different kinds of divestment. At Columbia, they want the university to divest from any company linked to Israel, like Microsoft and Amazon, while others are seeking divestment from weapons manufacturers.
But because some of the Fortune 500 companies, some of the largest companies in the American market are weapons manufacturers, technological organizations. So anyone with a broad sort of index of investments usually includes stocks in weapons makers.
Earlier this week, Northwestern University came to an agreement with students and faculty protesting the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, a step Yeoman says could set a precedent for how other schools respond to the calls for divestment.
I think this is a perfect model, actually, for the other universities to follow, and I think is only sort of a proper response to what we've seen happening in Gaza since October.
But not all agree. The Anti-Defamation League Midwest, along with the Brandeis Center and Stand With Us, issued a statement calling for Northwestern President Michael Schill to resign, saying that this agreement is rewarding protesters for their hate.
And that was Jeff Harris reporting. While Northwestern became the first school in the United States to publicly announce a deal, Brown University has also made an agreement to end protest activity. On Capitol Hill, some Republicans worry Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is working against the party and keeping her fight against House Speaker Mike Johnson alive. The Georgia Republican is aiming for a motion to vacate next week, doing to Johnson what happened to former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. That's causing some in the Republican Party to worry about more infighting ahead of November's election.
I can't wait to see Democrats go out and support a Republican speaker and have to go home to their primaries and have to run for Congress again, having supported a Republican speaker, a Christian conservative. I think that'll play well. I'm excited about it.
If her motion succeeds, it will likely bring to halt most activity in Congress in the same way McCarthy's ouster did. Johnson says the motion is, quote, wrong for the country. Meantime, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona grilled by lawmakers earlier this week on the technical issues that plagued this year's FAFSA process. The new forms rolled out to students in January, but were riddled with technical issues which could result in a drop in college enrollment. Roughly 1/3 of U.S. high school seniors had completed their FAFSA application as of April 19th. That's down about 30% from last year.
So the problem is that the ineptitude here has real life consequences.
I recognize the strain it's put on colleges, on financial aid offices, and they've bent over backwards to really meet students' needs, and we are appreciative of that, and we're listening to them as we're making decisions moving forward.
Meantime, the Biden administration argues the overhaul of FAFSA was a huge task. It said its requests for more funding from Congress were not met. However, Republicans say the Department of Education is too focused on student loan forgiveness to pay attention to FAFSA. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, plans to sue the U.S. government over a new national security law that forces it to be sold within the next year or be banned in the U.S. The company claims the law is unconstitutional, but a TikTok ban could be just the beginning. The National Desk, Atra El-Nashar, explains why Washington has its eye on other popular apps.
A new type of digital warfare may be unfolding in the palm of your hand. The newly passed Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act specifically calls out TikTok, owned by Beijing-based ByteDance, but it puts other popular apps on notice.
Foreign adversaries use technology for social and political control. Congress is acting to prevent foreign adversaries from conducting espionage, surveillance, maligned operations.
The U.S. is entering somewhat new territory by creating this law that could end up banning one of the most popular apps in the world. But it's a long-standing practice in China, where just about every American platform, from Facebook and Instagram to YouTube and even TikTok, have been banned for years.
Do we want Chinese software on our devices? Congress has said no. The administration has said no. So this is just chapter one of a longer story. The Chinese are so active in cyber espionage that this is like one drop out of the bucket.
Accusations China denies. Other apps that could face the same fate as TikTok include shopping apps Shein and Temu, and WeChat and Weibo.
Don't expect any of this to happen anytime soon. Not only is it an election year and lawmakers know how unpopular it was to go after TikTok, but with the company planning to sue, a ban could be held up in court.
The facts and the Constitution are on our side, and we expect to prevail again.
The outcome of the litigation would no doubt help determine the future of other apps controlled by a foreign adversary. If TikTok is banned, China is expected to retaliate. On Monday, its foreign ministry spokesperson said China will take strong and resolute measures to safeguard our sovereignty, security, and development interests. On Capitol Hill, I'm Atra El-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Now to a consumer alert. The U.S. government fined the nation's largest wireless carriers $200 million for illegally sharing customers' location data without their consent. The Federal Communications Commission says for years, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon gave geolocation history information to third parties in connection to their commercial programs. All four carriers plan to challenge the fines. Prosecutors in Manhattan, they say they will retry Harvey Weinstein's New York rape case. On an appeals court overturned the Hollywood producer's sex crimes conviction last week. A prosecutor at the hearing on Wednesday said the case against Weinstein remains strong and they want to retry it as soon as September, if possible. Legal experts say a retrial will depend on whether the women Weinstein is accused of assaulting are willing to testify again. He was also convicted of rape and sexual assault in Los Angeles in 2022 and sentenced to 16 years there. A growing number of local election officials say they're being threatened, harassed, and abused because of their work. According to a new poll from the Brennan Center for Justice, 38% of election officials report mistreatment. That's up 8 percentage points from last year's survey. Poll workers say threats are most often made in person or over the phone. This week, a federal appeals court in Virginia ruled state health care plans in West Virginia and North Carolina must cover gender-affirming surgeries. I'm with Connor from the Fact Check team. Why did the court rule this way?
Well, Dee Dee, the court ultimately decided that North Carolina's and West Virginia's state health insurance plans were discriminatory based off of the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution and federal laws because they deny coverage for, quote, medically necessary treatments for a diagnosis that's unique to transgender patients. For example, example, the court compared the fact West Virginia's program covers mastectomies to treat cancer, but will not cover the same procedure to treat gender dysphoria in transgender men.
All right, and then what happens next?
So this is going to be appealed to the Supreme Court, which very recently allowed Idaho's ban on gender-affirming care for minors to go into effect, but it's declined to hear other cases that impact transgender people, including students' access to bathrooms and participation in school sports.
All right, this has come up a lot, so a good conversation. I'll be back with Connor in just a bit to discuss other laws surrounding transgender health care. Coming up next, things are not looking up if you have some debt to your name. We explain. Plus, a rite of passage under fire, why some commencement ceremonies are gaining criticism. Stocks rallied strong after Fed Chair Jerome Powell announced it is unlikely we'll see another interest rate hike anytime soon. Joining Jen Jeffcoat to discuss is Vice President of General Economics and Trade at the Cato Institute, Scott Lincecum.
You know, Powell also emphasized that despite this being an election year, these decisions were not political. However, we see inflation right now remaining. We did see GDP in the first quarter really show a slowing economy. What do you make of what we're seeing right now with the GDP and inflation?
Yeah, as usual these days with the Fed, it's good news and bad news. The bad is that GDP is slowing. Now it's just 1.6%. Inflation, unfortunately, is still too high at 3.5%. So the soft landing everybody was hoping for in January is at best down the road, at worst off the table. Now, we're not expecting a huge recession or anything, but things are going to slow down. Economic activity is going to slow down, and interest rates are going to stay higher for longer. So anybody with an adjustable rate mortgage or credit card, car loan, well, you're going to be paying more interest for longer than maybe you thought. But there is some good news. The Fed's higher rates and their tight monetary tightening seem to be working in the sense they're slowing the economy without crashing it. And some of the inflation that's baked in there is lagging. It's from previous periods. So if that washes out in the coming months, then we could be fine. But as Powell said, we just got to wait and see.
And at the same time, he did say that they were not going to be cutting interest rates, which is something that he had said months ago, that there would be 3 this year. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, now it's looking more like 1 rate cut towards the end of the year, which is a huge change. You know, some banks were saying 6 rate cuts this year. So, you know, again, if you have any of that adjustable rate debt, you know, unfortunately, you're going to be paying for it a lot longer. Again,
just a result right now of a slowing economy and these high interest rates, Scott. And now more and more retailers are stepping up with their private label branding. Walmart just launched a new grocery brand called Better Goods. Plus, the growth of low-priced grocery chains like Aldi and Lidl, Trader Joe's really has increased customers' willingness to stray from national brands. Tell us more about this.
Well, it's all about inflation and grocery price inflation in particular. You know, contrary to what you might hear, people have a lot of choices when it comes to groceries, and consumers are flexing their muscles a bit. They're pushing back to counter that grocery inflation. So, you know, we used to shop at 16 stores for food, according to the latest data. Now we go to 21 stores. Now, that might be a little less convenient, but it can help act as a check on price increases. And it presents commercial opportunities for new competitors, Aldi and Lidl, or new brands like Walmart's Better Goods.
And this really shows the power of Walmart, right? It's grocery business, the largest in the country by revenue. In fact, nearly 60% of the company's sales inside the U.S. did come from its grocery business. So what is Walmart doing right?
Well, there are two big things, location and prices. You know, a lot of Walmarts are in places that don't have a lot of other grocery stores. And quite frankly, Walmart's offering killer prices on everyday staples. I shop there myself. And you add in the fact that you can get other stuff at Walmart too. And that's a recipe, no pun intended, for business success. And it's a big reason why Walmart, perhaps counterintuitively, has the highest market share in the country for grocery sales at around 23%.
Yep, I stopped there too, Scott. Let's talk China for a minute. I have about 20 seconds here. China's excess industrial capacity, a top concern for the U.S., obviously. The Biden administration not taking any option off the table to respond to China. What's happening here when it comes to trade?
Yeah, so to offset property crisis and weak demand, the Chinese government has subsidized the heck out of all these manufacturing sectors. But that's resulted in a lot of factories making lots of stuff, but nobody in China to buy it. So with profits sagging, those companies are looking abroad to the United States, to Europe, to export those goods. Now, we economists see this as a good thing. You know, cheap stuff is great. But politicians and some manufacturers, they don't like that competition, especially when it's coming in areas like EVs that those same politicians have subsidized. So they have trillions of dollars of taxpayers' money on the line, and they don't want that Chinese competition.
All right, Vice President of General Economics and Trade at the Cato Institute, Scott Lincecum. Great to see you as always. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
In addition to protest chaos and graduation ceremony cancellations, there's another issue brewing across the country on college campuses. Should there be special graduate ceremonies based on identity? The National Desk Janae Bowens has more.
Conservative college watchdog group Campus Reform is calling out colleges and universities hosting what they call segregated graduations.
That's just the cherry on top of 4 years of liberal indoctrination where they're trying to separate everybody and create this us versus them mentality.
Campus Reform's Cage Sawyer says these ceremonies are doing a disjustice to the students. For example, Youngstown State University held a lavender graduation celebration for LGBT-identifying students. The school says the ceremony acknowledges their leadership success, achievements, and contributions. The school will also have a Black graduation ceremony to honor the achievements of Black and Brown students from all corners of the diaspora and to acknowledge the supportive environment fostered by YSU, enabling our students to thrive amidst challenges.
These liberal college administrators are so hell-bent on forcing division between students, where by the time they leave these four-year institutions, they don't even know each other. They don't even know the stories of each other. And that's what I think is sad in this whole situation.
Scholar and author Dante King disagrees.
Black people were made to have separate ceremonies, were required to have separate ceremonies, and could not be in the same spaces as white people for the majority of this nation's history. It is entirely absurd that people would be targeting these graduation ceremonies and trying to paint them in anything else other than people who are taking pride.
These special ceremonies have been going on for years. Advocates say the divisive political climate is why they are currently being targeted, but critics say they fear this separation will spill into the corporate workforce. I'm Janae Bowens reporting.
Still ahead, the state forcing families to sell the homes of loved ones after they've died. How you can protect yourself. Plus, perpetrators in the passenger seat, the police department making headlines after a suspect was seen riding shotgun. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Prince George's County, Maryland, where the lack of backseat cages in county police patrol cars led to things getting out of control in at least 2 instances.
Criminologist Eric Pisa with Northeastern University was surprised to see officers transporting suspects in the front seat of a patrol car.
What jumped out at me from the video, though, was also the fact that the suspect was in the passenger seat rather than in the back seat or within some type of caged environment. That seems strange to me, and no police department that I'm aware of handles prisoner transport in that manner.
We did some checking, and D.C. police handle suspects totally different. It has a policy to never transport a suspect in the front seat of a patrol car. The majority of its patrol cars don't have backseat cages, just like Prince George's County. So it uses SUVs with cages and transport vans that have a separate compartment. Fairfax County Police say almost all police cruisers are equipped with safety barriers that separate the officer and the prisoner. Only in rare situations will prisoners be allowed to be transported in a patrol car that isn't caged.
In Portland, Maine, a family hit with not only grief but anger after the state forced sale of a deceased loved one's estate to pay off outstanding Maine care bills. According to the estate planning attorney, estate recovery is a federal law.
If somebody receives Medicaid over the age of 55, then the state has to be reimbursed from whatever they own at the time of death.
Fleischman suggests setting up a trust before going into a nursing home to protect properties from Maine Care's reach. To Providence, Rhode Island, where our station is now revealing a new study that fitness tracking apps could be tracking more than just your workout. Data protection company Incogni found multiple popular fitness tracking apps collect personal data.
What was a lot more concerning that not everything, at least at a glance, makes sense. For example, gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. It could be problematic to make a case how this helps us, how this information on the behalf of the app can help us achieve our goals.
He says the data could travel through the brokers, landing onto marketing companies, government agencies, or people with bad intentions. Just ahead, expanding care, the new technology available in emergency rooms that will help victims of abuse. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now, former Nickelodeon producer and writer Dan Schneider is now suing the makers of the documentary Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. The defamation suit claims the documentary wrongly implied he sexually abused child actors. Wallet Hub is naming Spirit Airlines the safest of 2024. It used the number of deaths and injuries between 2018 to 2023 and average fleet age as its metrics. U.S. Customs and Border Protection says it's intercepted venom from snakes, spiders, and scorpions and prevented from possibly going to horse trainers. CBP says some of the supply was found in Cincinnati and had originally arrived from Mexico. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. Pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson is proposing a new $6.5 billion settlement it says would resolve nearly all lawsuits claiming its talc-based baby powder contained asbestos and caused ovarian cancer. The deal calls for a third bankruptcy filing of a subsidiary company and would see the money paid out over 25 years. Courts have denied J&J's two previous efforts to resolve the lawsuits through bankruptcy, ruling it's not eligible because it was not in financial distress. The FDA has set a 2025 deadline for limiting toxic metals in baby food, but the change only comes after badgering from U.S. lawmakers. Back in 2021, Congress released a report revealing the dangerous levels of lead, arsenic, and cadmium in popular baby food. And the FDA hadn't taken action until recent questioning by Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. He says he's still not confident the agency will take action and is continuing to push for a definitive timeline.
I think that the industry is fighting back, they're resisting, and we have to do everything we can to make it clear to our legislators that we want them to act. We want them to push forward. We want our regulatory agencies like the FDA to be independent.
The congressman told the FDA he wants a written response to the timeline he's laid out no later than Friday. A new technology used in medical forensics is helping some survivors of domestic violence turn their lives around. It's a special camera called Cortex Flow that can capture signs of abuse most cameras would miss. With added contrast, it reveals injuries beneath the skin. Our team spoke with a young woman named Justice. She says she's seeing the images during an emergency room visit gave her the courage to leave an abusive relationship.
The camera made me realize that, because I used to downplay it. I didn't think that what he was doing to me was that bad because I couldn't see anything, and then I seen it and I had a breakdown.
The cameras are being used in more than 600 hospitals, clinics, and military locations nationwide. Ahead in our next half hour, an air travel-linked whistleblower dies. What we know about his sudden death. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
This is the National Desk, America's News Now.
A legal migration crackdown. How the U.S. and Mexico are teaming up to quell the stream of migrants at the border. A new form of crime. Crooks are now turning to artificial intelligence. How you can protect yourself from falling victim. Is the U.S. economy headed for stagflation? We'll break down why some economists fear we are. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Gatton, and the head of the nation's biggest bank now says he's concerned the U.S. economy will see a repeat of the 1970s when inflation was high and economic growth was slow. A disappointing GDP reading and higher than expected inflation report last week, adding to those worries. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has a closer look at the numbers.
Back-to-back disappointing readings of the economy last week, deflating hopes the U.S. can make it out of this period of high inflation unscathed. An advanced reading of first quarter GDP shows the economy grew at a sluggish rate of 1.6%. At the same time, the measure of inflation the Federal Reserve watches closest isn't budging at a stubborn 2.8%. This stalled progress is stoking fears of stagflation, considered a central bank's worst nightmare when inflation is high and economic growth is slow.
The U.S. has been through this before in the 1970s during a period known as the Great Inflation. And it was really 1974 and 75 that saw the worst of stagflation. The economy actually shrunk while inflation was north of 8 and 9%. Of course, what we're seeing now is nothing like that. But the CEO of the nation's largest bank says he's remaining cautious.
It looks a little bit more like the 70s to me. And I point out to a lot of people, things look pretty rosy in 1972. They were not rosy in 1973. So don't get lulled into a false sense of security.
Historians say those economic struggles were among the reasons why both Presidents Ford and Carter lost their re-election bids. In the Biden White House, the president's top economic advisor says they're closely watching the factors that helped bring inflation down from its 9% peak 2 summers ago.
Are they just on a break or are they gone? And obviously, we've argued that they are that they're still there and that we expect inflation to continue a bumpy path down towards target.
The Fed's target inflation rate is 2%, and its members are adamant they won't cut interest rates until they're sure it's within reach.
The world needs to brace for a more prolonged period of time of somewhat higher interest rates.
Your total is an expensive remedy to high inflation that economists expect to stick around for the better part of this year. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
A nearly all abortion ban in Arizona is now officially off the books. This week, Governor Katie Hobbs signed the repeal, and as we reported last month, a ruling from the Arizona Supreme Court revived enforcement of an 1864 law which criminalized all abortions except when the life of the mother was at stake. Now that the measure is lifted, a 15-week ban is the new standard. However, there is a push for signatures to get a 24-week ban on the ballot. Developing right now, we are learning another air travel-linked whistleblower has died suddenly. The Seattle Times reports Joshua Dean died Tuesday after a sudden and severe infection. The 45-year-old was a former quality auditor at supplier Spirit Aerosystems. Dean was fired last year for flagging serious quality failings at the production facility, as well as testifying in a lawsuit against the company. His family says he contracted pneumonia and suffered a stroke after a MRSA infection. New details. The U.S. military has admitted that it mistakenly killed a civilian in an airstrike in Syria last year. This comes after the man was initially misidentified as a senior al-Qaeda leader. Questions about who was actually killed in the airstrike were raised almost immediately after it happened last May. The man's family insisted he was not an al-Qaeda leader, but a farmer and father of 10. Still, the U.S. did not launch an official investigation until nearly 8 weeks later. A Maryland high school employee faces a slew of charges for allegedly creating an AI-generated tape of the school's principal making racist remarks. The National Desk, Janae Bowen, has a look at how you can protect yourself and others from being misrepresented.
It's already an historic case, gripping the nation and dominating headlines. In Maryland, a high school employee was arrested and charged for allegedly creating this.
And if I have to get one more complaint from one more Jew in this community, I'm going to join the other side.
Baltimore County Police allege Pikesville High School's athletic director, Dazon Darian, used AI to create a fake audio recording of Principal Eric Eiswert making racist comments.
Made the recording to retaliate against the principal who had launched an investigation into the potential mishandling of school funds.
The principal's name is now cleared.
Imagine that your own reputation and your credibility as an individual is attacked by someone using artificial intelligence.
Dr. Lisa Palmer, an artificial intelligence business strategist who designs business models, processes, and services, says, we're going to see more crimes like this in the future, but there are some things you can do to protect yourself.
Be very cautious about what information you share online. And for those that have a really public presence or that choose to actively engage in social media, particularly from a video perspective, your risk profile is higher.
On the flip side, folks can now blame AI for their bad behavior.
We no longer can trust what we see. We no longer can trust what we hear. And so the unfortunate outcome of that is going to be that people who do misbehave are going to be able to claim that it's fake and be able to get away with it. Essentially, don't click and don't share content unless you have cross-checked with other credible sources to ensure that what you're looking at is real content.
People are now calling for new laws and better technology for the misuse and abuse of artificial intelligence. I'm Janae Bowens reporting.
New information, the number of FBI intelligence database searches on Americans has plummeted in the last year. According to a U.S. government report, there were 119,000 fewer searches on Americans this year. This comes just over a week after Congress voted to reauthorize a controversial surveillance program known as Section 702 of the FISA Act, allowing the government to collect certain foreign communications without a warrant. Critics are voicing concerns over potential privacy abuse for Americans. Roughly 23 million families in the U.S. will soon get a higher internet bill. The Affordable Connectivity Program, an effort to bring internet access to every U.S. household, has now expired. And while Congress hasn't taken action to keep funding the roughly $14 billion program, there is some hope that the program will be extended eventually. Turning now to the crisis at the border, President Biden and Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador are once again making clear they're working together to crack down on illegal immigration. The president spoke to his Mexican counterpart earlier this week. The administration says both leaders agreed to increasing enforcement measures that would prevent major modes of transportation from being used to facilitate illegal migration, as well as increasing repatriation flights for migrants from both the U.S. and Mexico. Joining Jan Jeffcoat to discuss is former acting head of Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan.
Mark, these two had a phone conversation Sunday, now coming out with this joint statement as we get closer to the elections when border security has emerged as one of the top reasons voters headed to the polls this year. What'd you make of this?
Yeah, phone call, Jen. After 3.5 years of the worst border security crisis in our lifetime, of which the magnitude of chaos and lawlessness is impacting every aspect of our nation's safety and national security. Over the past 38 months, 9.2 million total nationwide encounters, 2 million known gotaways. We know that we've apprehended individuals from 180 different countries, many of them that we know sponsor, harbor, and facilitate terrorism. The Border Patrol's apprehended over 350 illegal aliens on the terror watch list. We know drugs are coming in year after year that have killed over 100,000 Americans. Look, the list goes on. We know that criminals, violent criminals, are pouring across our border every day, like the savage that allegedly killed Laken Riley. And what we have 3.5 years later is a phone call. What about, I want to hear, what are they going to do to destroy and dismantle the cartels? What are they going to do to go after China to stop the precursor chemicals of fentanyl from pouring into Mexico and across our border? If this is to mean any other thing than political saber rattling, this is what we should see. We should see a couple of concrete action that Mexico is going to devote tens of thousands of resources to secure their southern border and interior enforcement. We should see the Remain in Mexico be implemented along all 2,000 miles of the southern border immediately, and we should start to see the reconstruction of the wall system. If we don't see those things, this is nothing more than political position right before the election.
Speaking of which, Biden did say he could use some kind of executive action just a couple of months ago, yet he's also said, along with some of those in his cabinet, that some of these actions would be blocked by the courts. But you just mentioned some of those executive actions, the same actions he reversed that Trump already had in place 4 years ago.
Look, Jen, that's right. And we've got people right now that say, well, wait a minute. We can't do anything because the courts may block it. That's nonsensical. Again, as we're in the midst of the greatest chaos and lawlessness at our border, this administration, rather than saying, hey, look, we're going to do everything that we possibly can to think outside the box to stop the death and destruction that's coming across our border. No, we're not going to do anything at all because the courts may block it. That's absurd. And then, Jen, to your point, we already know there are several tools and authorities we had in place under the Trump administration that survived the court process. The Safe Third Country agreements, they survived the court process. The Remain in Mexico, again, survived the court process, was found to be constitutional as well as the wall. President Biden could take his pen, the same pen they used to destroy all of those policies, and react them overnight. Now look, that's not going to solve every the bit of the issue, but those issues that I just mentioned would be a game changer and help solve this crisis overnight.
You can view the full interview plus more top stories online all the time at thenationaldesk.com. We are less than 1 month away from hurricane season, and forecasters are predicting 33 named storms for this year. Those names are placed in alphabetical order and alternate between male and female names. Here are the first 5 names: Alberto, Beryl, Chris, Debbie, and Ernesto. A tropical storm gets a name when it hits 39 miles per hour. It becomes a hurricane at 74 miles per hour. This week, a federal appeals court ruled state health care plans must cover gender-affirming surgeries, finding North Carolina's and West Virginia's state health insurance plans were discriminatory against transgender patients. I'm back with Connor from the Fact Check team. How many states' insurance plans actually cover gender-affirming care?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, Dee Dee, because there's several treatments that qualify as gender-affirming care, but 5 common ones include counseling, hormones, surgery, voice and communication therapy, and fertility assistance. Now, a couple years ago, the Kaiser Family Foundation did a survey of 41 states asking if they covered any of those 5 treatments. 2 states, Maine and Illinois, said they covered all 5 of them. In 2 other states, Alabama and Texas, reported they do not cover any of those services under Medicaid. Now, several states reported that they cover a few or different aspects of those treatments, with 23 covering gender-affirming surgery for adults through their state Medicaid programs.
Has anything been done on the federal level?
Yeah, Dee Dee, just last month, the Biden administration issued a regulation that strengthens protections for transgender patients by prohibiting federally funded health providers and insurers from discrimination against patients on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
All right, Connor, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the president's handling of the Israel-Hamas war to new concerns over foreign cyber attacks.
Welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, reporting on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. Our team of correspondents is here to share their insights on the stories they've been covering. Pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests on college campuses across the country, drawing the attention of leaders in the nation's capital. National correspondent Matt Galka, even President Biden weighed in this past week.
Yeah, Stephen, I think he had to. He had very limited comments to make in the past couple of weeks that we've seen these protests springing up. He had condemned anti-Semitism, but that's about as far as he went. But after the scenes we saw at Columbia and at UCLA, at Columbia where a building was occupied and damaged by some of these protesters and the NYPD moved in, at UCLA where protest groups were fighting with each other, protesters were fighting with the police, and the LAPD had to move in with riot shields. The president really had no other choice but to respond, where he did talk about the freedom of speech and how it's a pillar of this country, but peacefully, peaceful protests. He condemned the violence. He continued to condemn anti-Semitism and racism in general. But these, again, after mounting criticism of not speaking out for the past couple of weeks, all of these protests and these arrests kind of forced his hand.
Right, and that criticism coming mostly from conservatives, but the political fallout with younger voters is something we're going to be watching closely. The president's handling of the Israel-Gaza war has some of those young voters souring on his re-election bid. National correspondent Christine Frizzell, what's going on with the softening support among young voters?
It's been really interesting to watch this play out, Steve. As you know, young voters have been a loyal voting bloc for Democrats for decades now. And now we're seeing more and more speak out, first of all, about this issue that you're talking about with, United States support for Israel. A lot of these young people don't want him to, as the representative for the U.S., give military aid and financial aid to a country they say are, killing tens of thousands of people in Gaza, many of them women and children. So that is one issue. But there's a lot of issues here for young voters that seem to be changing their sentiment. There's kitchen table issues like the economy. A lot of young people feel like they are not going to be able to buy a house until they're much older than their parents were, for example. There's also issues like climate change, which President Biden has really tried to win them over on. Student loan forgiveness, which he's tried and in many cases failed due to the courts blocking his attempts. And just this past week, we saw the Biden administration change the what marijuana is classified as, making it a less dangerous drug. All of these attempts, it is believed here in Washington, by the Biden administration to try to get some of those younger voters on board. But just to show you the challenge, a new CNN poll showed that 51% of young voters as of now are supporting Trump versus 40% for Biden. This is really, really shocking. Of course, polls differ. One thing that experts say to be wary of is that young voters also don't really look ahead in elections. So a lot of them are just not really thinking about this right now. One other factor here, it's not like a lot of young voters who are not supporting Biden due to the Israel issue that they're going to go vote for Trump. That's very unlikely. They may vote for third-party candidates like Cornel West or just not vote at all.
Yeah, a lot of work for the president over the next 6 months. Meanwhile, turning to national security issues, national correspondent Atra Elnashar, new red flags about cyber attacks from our foreign adversaries. Tell us what intelligence officials said this past week.
Yeah, during a hearing on worldwide threats before the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, explained to lawmakers just how much ransomware attacks are skyrocketing worldwide. But the main targets are U.S. entities, especially healthcare systems. We saw that United Health Group hack back in February that was extremely disruptive. But intelligence officials say it's America's critical infrastructure, water systems, agriculture, energy, transportation, you name it, that would be prime targets if the United States were to enter an actual war with countries that many in Washington are now calling the new axis of evil: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And some good news, you can be rest assured that intelligence officials don't expect an imminent attack that would disrupt everyday life, because these countries are aware of their own vulnerabilities and they don't want to counterattack, sort of a mutually assured destruction here. But they say that the first line of defense is what private companies can do. And it's really pretty simple if you think about it. They're things that don't necessarily come with a high cost. Sometimes it's as much as changing a bad password that can make a world of difference in protecting America's critical infrastructure. Because remember, the majority of America's infrastructure is run by private companies and not the government.
Atra, Christine, Matt, thank you all for your great reporting and your hard work. Back to you.
Up next here on the National Desk, America's News Now. New details on an online tool revealing crime hotspots in North Carolina. Plus, a Seattle man's brush with death, the ongoing investigation after a steel beam was thrown through his windshield on the highway. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From an online tool revealing crime hotspots in North Carolina to a metal beam thrown off a highway overpass in Washington state. We're taking the pulse of America, but we start with a burn victim in Florida thanking the firefighter that saved his life.
Demetrius. Hey, buddy. Looking good.
Good to see you. What's up, big fella? How you doing? Give me a hug, man.
Demetrius Golette, an 8th grader, came to St. Lucie County Fire District Station 15 to express his thanks to a couple of firefighters that, to him, were his guardian angels.
I'm happy that they saved me from the fire, and I'm glad that I'm still alive.
These photos from the St. Lucie County Fire District show the scene back in February 2013 when firefighters rescued Demetrius from a raging fire that swept through his great-grandparents' Fort Pierce home.
The police officers were saying somebody was in there, and we could hear him moaning and groaning. So we ripped the bars off the window. The fire was coming down the hallway, pretty much on top of him. I grabbed his legs, Chris grabbed his arms, and we went.
I appreciate them for saving me from the fire, house fire. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been here.
Officials with the police department say this means no one was hurt and no weapons were involved. If they meet the criteria, crimes like car theft, shoplifting, and vandalism can be reported. Once the crime is filed and confirmed, the victim should get an email or a call with a case number. Police also say it's about efficiency, letting officers respond to emergency calls instead. Some of the crimes reported may find their way into the new community crime map, showing where crimes have taken place and when. Here you can see I've searched for homicides and manslaughter cases within the last year. Levine Smith and Christopher Hendricks, who live in Greensboro, think the map may not just be useful for knowing where crimes happened.
If there's break-ins, I definitely wouldn't move there. I'm not gonna lie. I definitely wouldn't. I mean, the best thing is to be protected and feel safe and comfortable.
Seriously, I thought I was dead. I thought I was dead, seriously. Everybody said, you know, I need to buy a lottery ticket last night because, yeah, I was lucky.
Gregory Sannon was just on his way to work like any other day when a large steel beam suddenly came crashing through his windshield.
Glass was all over, shattered all over all over the car, you know, little pieces of like powder glasses everywhere, and my ears everywhere.
The beam, about 51 inches long, just barely missed him, landing on the seat next to him and across his lap.
It would have been a disaster. Seriously, I got very lucky. The way it happened, it was pure luck.
Thankfully, Sannon was not seriously injured and there was no one else in his vehicle or nearby on the road, so he was able to avoid another potential disaster. Washington State Patrol is investigating.
Even if, you know, I was on my way going to work, somebody almost killed me, you know, for no reason.
Incredible story. Glad he's okay. Still ahead next. The story's making headlines next week. From the sentencing in a high-profile January 6 case to the anniversary of VE Day. Looking ahead to stories making headlines this week, on Monday, a Virginia man convicted on 10 counts related to the January 6 Capitol riots is set to be sentenced. Federal prosecutors have recommended a term of more than 11 years for Zachary Allam. Wednesday, May 8th, is VE Day, marking the end of World War II in Europe. On this day, 77 years ago, the Allies accepted the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. And on Thursday, a Maine man who pleaded guilty to a New Year's Eve machete attack against NYPD officers will be sentenced. Trevor Bickford was 19 years old when he carried out the attack, pleading guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.